This is a podcast of Costing the Earth from the BBC. For full terms and conditions, please go to the website at bbc.co.uk. Now here is Costing the Earth with me, Tom Heap. When you see movies set in London, they very often feature the place that I'm standing in now, the Royal Borough of Greenwich. It has the park on a hill, the Royal Observatory, the Naval College, and just off to my right it's got the Dome, now known as the O2, and of course the Thames running through the middle of it. It's a very, very attractive place, known throughout the world, and visitors from around the world will soon be able to come directly here because they're planning to build a cruise ship terminal. But what you don't see from a brochure about cruising is the pollution that comes from such ships, especially when they're tied up, moored on their berth, because they keep their engines running to keep all the electrics going. So what we're looking at on Costing the Earth today is what can be done to address the pollution and consequent air quality problems arising from our passion for cruising. And I'm with Dan Hayes and Ralph Hardwick, who both live hereabouts. Dan and Ralph, tell me, what will I be seeing in a few years' time if the cruise ship companies get their way?
You'll probably be seeing something fairly large, a large vessel, probably about 50 yards off the shore, connected to a pier, which will then run into a cruise liner terminal. And then adjacent to the terminal on the land side, there'll be a fairly large residential development.
Can you give me an idea of the kind of scale it would be in the landscape here? I mean, over to my left I can see the whole Canary Wharf development, so you have got some pretty big structures in the view here.
Exactly, but on this side there are some 8-storey buildings, but from where I live on the other side of the river, those will be completely obliterated by a moored cruise ship. They're that size.
The scale of the ship tells us something about the issue that I think most residents around here are animated about. Residents were genuinely surprised to find out that this cruise liner terminal would actually be powered off its own diesel generators. So, it's effectively a town running beside the centre of Greenwich, running off diesel engines, which is an extraordinary thing to contend with, I think. But
can you give me some kind of scale or figures on what that pollution is equivalent to?
Initially we were suggesting it might be like having 400 HGVs here. But
parked with their engines on.
Exactly.
Yep.
But when that was in an email exchange that took place between the GLA and their air quality consultants, the air quality consultants came back and said, oh, well, they could have used 688 HGVs. And the air itself already exceeds the limit of nitrogen dioxide of 40 micrograms per cubic metre. So, in general, the permission should have been refused.
Air pollution is thought to shorten the lives of 40,000 people a year in the UK and condemn many more to devastating illness. The main culprits within the fumes are nitrogen dioxide and oxide, together known as NOx, sulphur dioxide and tiny particles which can penetrate to our vital organs. The lungs are especially vulnerable. Esther Bakari is a schoolgirl with asthma. She lives in East London, not far from the proposed cruise ship terminal.
My chest, it feels tight and I start wheezing. My lungs get inflamed and it's difficult to breathe.
How bad can it feel?
If you get like a very thin straw and bend it and then try to breathe in and out through it, that's how it feels when you're having like an asthma attack.
Jonathan Grigg is a professor of paediatric and respiratory medicine, and Esther is one of his patients. He says problems can start even before birth.
The child, before it's even born, is getting hits from the mother breathing in particles and gases, so that's going to impair its growth in the womb. So these children, when they're born, haven't reached their maximum weight, even their maximum head circumference in some cases.
He is part of a growing chorus of disapproval in the medical profession directed towards air pollution. Stephen Holgate from Southampton University sings from the same hymn sheet.
We're talking about increase in heart attacks, chronic obstructive lung disease or bronchitis. And most recently, we've got a very worrying trend on dementia and cognition. 40,000 deaths each year are brought forward by air pollution. Had that been water pollution, there would be a national outcry.
Air pollution is becoming a more regular resident in the headlines. The government's plans to tackle it have just been found in court to be so inadequate they're illegal. Heathrow expansion is being prepared for liftoff, and the vehicle diesel emissions scandal rumbles on. But the quality of the air we breathe in many of our cities remains stubbornly poor, and Greenwich is a prime example, with many areas regularly worse than legal limits, and a recent academic study suggested air pollution caused 1 in 5 premature deaths in the borough. And this is where they're planning to bring in diesel-powered cruise ships. Local opponents Dan Hayes and Ralph Hardwick again.
Greenwich is an air quality management zone. It's a dirty borough, for want of a better expression. And we do particularly suffer from traffic pollution. I guess because of the heavy congestion in Trafalgar Road. We've also got the Blackwall Tunnel, which is a bit of a black spot generally for pollution in the area. So we know we've got issues. The council knows we have issues, and they've been monitoring pollution in the borough for many, many years, but monitoring it but not doing much about it. And I think, this on top of what we know to be a dirty installation, we just can't understand why anyone in Greenwich Council would think this was a good idea.
Who gives it the go-ahead, and who could have said no?
DEFRA have devolved air quality to the GLA and the London boroughs, and now some of it's come down to a planning consideration. And that's the problem, that the planners have not really been talking with the environmentalists to fully understand the implications of what we're going to be in for.
When you say environmentalists, it almost takes it away from what we're talking about here, which is premature death and effect on people's quality of life.
Yes.
And yet it doesn't seem to count when it comes to planning.
Well, I actually think a mistake has been made. They thought it would be a great idea to have a cruise liner terminal in Greenwich, and in many respects it would do. It would regenerate the area. There's a good economic argument for saying that a cruise liner terminal may be a good thing. But at that point, nobody then did the work on determining whether it would comply with environmental standards on a sort of go-forward basis. And if you roll the clock forward from that, when that decision was made back in 2008, 9, 10, things have moved on. We've become a lot more aware of the issues surrounding diesel emissions in particular. And I just think a mistake has been made, and they're finding it absolutely impossible to row back from that decision.
One element, right from the original planning application that was made, nobody considered the emissions from a moored cruise ship. They were more concerned about what was happening with the road transport in the vicinity of trucks and buses going backwards and forwards. When they made a revised application, it became more focused about it.
That timing is crucial, isn't it? Because it is only in the last 6 years or so that the whole issue of air pollution in general has become a huge issue. I mean, the number of scientific papers I read about it now.
There have been some improvements because the Thames, the English Channel and the North Sea do have what is termed a sulphur emission control area, which now means that ships have to burn a lower sulphur diesel of 0.1%. But that is still 100 times more sulphur than what we would buy in our cars and vehicles.
And that doesn't address the other issues of the NOx and the particulates.
And in general, there is absolutely no post-combustion mitigation on any of the vessels that come up the river.
Now, loyal listeners may know this is not the first time we've tackled air pollution on Costing the Earth. We've looked at everything from dodgy claims from car makers to clothes that absorb pollution, maps that show you cleaner city streets, and even ships using giant kites to reduce emissions. All this as the evidence of damage to our health continues to grow. We'll be looking a little later at whether our planners and politicians are following or ignoring these emerging truths. But first, off to Southampton, a city by the sea.
It's a fantastic craft, isn't it? It's some sort of jet engine, I believe, so it's NOx.
NOx, particulates, you name it.
Yeah.
They've just brought a new one into service, which is allegedly slightly less polluting. And they've missed a golden opportunity. They could have had an electric ferry going to the Isle of Wight. You know, we could have all electric short-distance craft here.
Recently named by the World Health Organization as one of the most polluted cities in the UK, Southampton has at its heart a vast 726-acre dock. It handles around 14 million tonnes of cargo each year, supports 15,000 jobs and contributes around £1 billion to the UK economy. Each year, 1.7 million cruise ship passengers pass through the port, not to mention all the vehicles that use passenger ferries. Liz Batten and Colin McQueen are from Clean Air Southampton. I met up with them on the waterfront. All around us were container ships, ferries, smaller vessels and a rather large cruise ship.
I think it's an Italian constructed cruise ship, something like 130,000 tons.
Do you know how many passengers and crew roughly on those things?
I think over 3,000 passengers and approximately 900 crew. The amount of fuel that they burn is astronomical. That ship could probably get through 30,000 gallons of diesel a day. All of these ships that we can see around us are currently running off their own diesel generators. So every second that they are in port, they are producing NOx, diesel particulates. They are chugging out who knows what else, sulphur.
Air pollution is less visible than you might like in the sort of medical world, but it also is in our real world today. I mean, you know, we're standing here on a fresh autumn day. It feels incredibly clean. You know, I can see for miles down Southampton Water. It's very intangible, isn't it? And do you think that's part of its threat?
It's very difficult. You really need to stretch your imagination to think that this could possibly be harming you. But it is.
The way that we realised this was that on the day that we launched in April this year, we were helped by a company that owns a vehicle called a Smogmobile, which is an electric van with all the monitoring equipment on board, measuring particulates and NOx, as well as other things. And we drove from the east of the city into the city centre, and all along its route it was monitoring at least 50% above EU permitted levels. Then we parked it up away from traffic in a pedestrian precinct just to measure ambient air, and it was still 50% above on a day like today, which is sunny, light breeze and so on. So we're now convinced that we're dealing with a serious problem.
Is it your contention that ships coming in here are in effect killing some of the local residents?
Yes. We're talking about premature deaths here. We're talking about people dying 6 months, 9 months, possibly a year before their natural time would come. And any of us who have loved ones would really clearly think that's pretty important. That's 6 months, a lot can happen.
But Southampton is built round its docks, and many of the people who live here have lived with this pollution and lived with the jobs that it creates.
We need to look at how Southampton can continue to be a vibrant port and look after the people who live here. I think it's entirely possible to create a city that is primarily a walking and cycling city that lives alongside a properly managed port. It needs some clear thinking and quite substantial inputs of money to do it, but I'm absolutely sure it can be done.
There is one possible solution that seems quite simple.
You plug your ship in and it runs off shoreside electric power.
And this does exist in some places?
Yeah, a couple of the Californian ports have it, nothing in the UK.
To find out more, we spoke to Chris Cannon. He's the Director of Environmental Management for the Port of Los Angeles. The port is huge, covering 43 miles of coastline and handling thousands of cruise and cargo ships each year. So what made the port pursue this technology?
There was a study done at the end of the 1990s by the state of California that determined that diesel particulate matter was a carcinogen. And they then went and studied where the highest concentrations of diesel particulate matter are here in Southern California. And as you might guess, the highest concentrations of diesel particulate matter were in the area around the two ports here, the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach. When a ship is sitting at berth, the auxiliary engines power generators, and those generators power all the on-ship activities. And so we determined that we could have a substantial reduction of emissions from shore power. When a ship is ready to plug in at the Port of Los Angeles, they call ahead, and a combination of our staff and the longshore staff meet the ship. The ship then gets ready to plug in, and the whole process takes maybe an hour. It sounds simple, but the science and the procedures took a while to standardize internationally so that ships can plug in coming from anywhere in the world and going anywhere in the world. You had to have a standard plug. So we had to work with the international organizations and shipping industry to standardize that, and it took several years to do that. The results have been dramatic. We've had since 2005, which was our base year, we've had a 97% reduction in sulfur oxides. It's virtually gone away. 85% reduction in diesel particulate matter, and a little over 50% reduction in NOx. We've spent probably $400 million on environmental programs over the last 10 years, and probably $200 million of that was related to shore power. It costs about $1 million for a container ship to retrofit in order to accept shore power, and even more, it costs $7 to $8 million for a terminal to outfit a berth to deliver shore power to a ship. And so it's been expensive. But we believe that the price of health and the environment is well worth it. The cost of improving the health of those who work here and those who live in this region is priceless.
Could giant dockside sockets save lives in Southampton? A question I put to Chris Hammond, City Councillor responsible for air quality.
That is absolutely where we need to be. We've had those discussions with the cruise companies, and what they say to us is, well, all our cruise ships have different plugs, so it's all different plugs for different ships. I think that's a pretty poor excuse. Where we need to be is we need to make sure that every ship that comes into Southampton, I want them plugged into the grid so that we don't have those diesel engines pumping out fumes. Because every time one of these ships comes in, we're talking thousands of car type emissions coming out and being breathed in by everyone who lives along Millbrook, Fremantle area, along the docks of the city.
You, the council, want it. Do you have the power to insist on it happening?
We don't have the power to insist on it, so we'll work with the cruise companies, we'll work with the port to make sure it's a reality.
Why don't you have the power? This is quite literally the matter of life and death. If someone said, I'm going to bring something up here that was quite clearly going to shorten the lives of, hundreds of people, people would say no right off. How come with air pollution they can ignore you?
Well, I think we need stronger powers from central government to allow us to insist on that kind of thing. And what I'd like to see is that every major operator and port insists on this. And then that way, everyone will be doing it. The incentive is there for those companies to invest in that technology. Councils can invest in that technology, and we've got improvements across the country.
And what about back in the dirty borough of Greenwich? Could it work here?
There is a large engineering company that actually provides a turnkey system to provide onshore power supply. And the estimation that for the facilities at the dockside are approximately £2-3 million.
That's all. I mean, that doesn't sound like a lot to me.
That's what I've been told. But
the ships then need to be equipped to take it. That's the other thing.
The suggestion is it will cost each vessel about £500,000 if they're the larger vessel.
You would think that some companies, or the cruise ship business in general, would think this is a great way of showing how we can behave in somewhere as iconic as Greenwich that has an existing health problem as a result of air quality. Let's do it here and show how lovely we are.
Exactly. I mean, they'll say, it's a marquee destination, but somebody's sort of saying, we don't want to spend the money.
What this makes you think is that overall air quality as an issue still lacks bite to make things happen or not happen.
I think that's fair. I mean, the experience from getting involved in this as just an ordinary local resident is that nobody seems to be taking ownership of the problem.
Prompting a question for local Labour MP for Greenwich, Matthew Pennycook. I'm just wondering kind of how it's got to this position. Where is the person who could be saying no?
I think that is part of the problem in the sense that there is no clear framework of accountability for tackling air pollution in a serious way in terms of the public health crisis that it is. And what we found with this planning application was that no one really wanted to take responsibility for dealing with and reducing the air quality impact, for ensuring that there are no adverse health effects. Things are bad, people are dying prematurely, their health is being affected now. The health of me and my family and my unborn baby is being affected by this. People should be angry. I'm angry as the local Member of Parliament, and government must do more than it has done to date. If it isn't a clean and green terminal, then I don't think the community should have to put up with it.
That all adds up to a pretty hefty charge sheet facing the new terminal, even suggestions of a threat to life. So you'd want to hear from its backers, or those who've given the go-ahead, and so did we. but no one would talk to us. We asked the landowner, Morgan Stanley. No. The developers, London City Cruiseport. No. Greenwich Borough Council. No. The Greater London Authority. No. The minister responsible for air pollution at DEFRA, Therese Coffey, looked hopeful, but then no. We did get some statements. The council said they always followed due process relating to this planning application, and this includes the independent monitoring of air quality. The Office for London Mayor Sadiq Khan, who leads the London Assembly, said he is concerned about the potential pollution from the new terminal and is looking for additional measures to protect public health. He is seeking new power to tackle pollution from river traffic as part of a Clean Air Act. And one line from DEFRA: the government is firmly committed to improving the UK's air quality and cutting harmful emissions. I know journalists don't have a God-given right to response, but don't those involved owe it to Esther Bakari, 13 years old, living in East London with her mother Amawubi and family, and suffering with asthma?
In the morning, the first thing I do is check my peak flow and record it down. 320. And then I'll use my purple inhaler, and then I'll use all the rest of my other medicines. I've had asthma for a very, very long time. I'm used to it, but it still gets scary at times.
It's been really, really difficult. Whenever she comes to our room to wake us up, I feel so panicked because I care for her and I don't want anything bad to happen to her. In the middle of the night, sometimes it can be so severe that I had to dial 999 to call the ambulance for help.
Is it a matter of life and death?
Yeah, it's a matter of life and death, I can tell you.
Sometimes it will start by my chest being tight. Sometimes I'll feel dizzy, and sometimes I'll just start coughing. But most times my chest gets tight, and then I'll find myself struggling to inhale and exhale, and then you can hear me wheezing sometimes, depending on how bad it is. Sometimes you can hear the wheeze, sometimes you can't hear the wheeze.
How big a problem do you think air pollution is?
Yeah, air pollution has been very terrible around here, especially living very close to the A13.
London's a very busy place in general. Everywhere you go, you're exposed to air pollution.
I notice you have a bottle of oxygen in the corner of the room. How often do you have to use that, and when and why?
I use that when I get really bad. If I can't inhale the inhaler properly, I would also use that because it's a mask, so either way it's just going to go in than me inhaling and breathing in and out.
And it's the effects of air pollution, like those we've seen with Esther Bakari, that enrage scientists and air quality campaigners, as I discovered at a recent conference in Bristol.
So this is a very strange anachronism, really, where we're tolerating this incredible adverse effect on human health as if it's the norm.
One of the key speakers at the conference was Professor Stephen Holgate from the University of Southampton, who we heard from earlier.
The recent research, that is over the last 5 years, has revealed a whole range of diseases that are linked to air pollution, not least of which the birth of children much smaller in terms of their lung function than they would have been had they not been exposed to the pollution. Secondly, the fact that diabetes is increased in those exposed to high levels of pollution. Thirdly, that we've got premature aging of organs like the skin and the eye, as a result of the chemicals that are interacting with those particular parts. And most recently, we've got a very worrying trend on dementia and cognition. Cognition in children and dementia in older people, with particles from air pollution being found in the brain. The main thing about air pollution is to think of it as exposure across the whole life course, from the time a baby is conceived to the time somebody dies. And that's the aspect of pollution we haven't actually looked at. And the problem is the public know very little about this. And we've really got to now up our game, both in the medical profession and beyond, to try and raise awareness. The time for change is now.
So what chance of a change? A question for Jonathan Grigg, Professor of Paediatric and Respiratory Medicine at Queen Mary University of London. And I couldn't help expressing my frustration. In making this programme, we've tried to get a response and hear from Greenwich themselves, the landowners of the new port development, the GLA, the Greater London Authority, DEFRA, the department responsible for air pollution. No one would come and talk to us. What do you think of that?
I'm totally shocked. I suppose if they're not engaging with the public, the concern is that there's something being hidden. We, as researchers, as clinicians, take it extremely seriously. We think that air pollution is a public health crisis. It's one of the top problems that we face in this country in urban areas. But we need to get a grip. Politicians need to get a grip on this crisis. We need probably a new Clean Air Act, and we need buy-in from government. I think their responses are wishy-washy and just don't make sense to me. We need to dramatically reduce emissions from roads, from shipping, from trains, from all of these things. I don't think there's a huge economic cost to that. We need to get those levers to make sure that action is happening in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, not in 20 years' time.
Well, there is something happening now. This week, a new Clean Air Bill is being presented before Parliament by Labour MP for Swansea West, Geraint Davis.
The clinical fraternity is behind taking action sooner or later. The public know it's a real danger and there's an expectation on government to act. They keep on losing court cases, how they're failing to meet the basic EU emission standards. Maybe they're hoping to scrap them with Brexit. But one thing won't go away, and that's the knowledge of the public now and of the medical community that something must be done to stop this diesel death on an epidemic scale.
While the authorities may be failing to get a grip on air pollution, Esther says she and all of us can't avoid its grip.
A lot of people usually push the matter of air pollution aside. It affects everybody, but not everybody notices it. But if you could physically see it, then a lot of people will take action on it. Every single breath you take, you're still breathing in polluted air. But if, as I said, if you could see it, you would be disgusted in the poor quality air you're breathing in.
This programme began by looking at fumes from cruise ships, but has ended by questioning whether those in authority really take the problem of air pollution seriously. I can't understand how ships emitting the equivalent exhaust of over 600 idling trucks can be allowed in an existing bad air hotspot, and sadly the project's backers refuse to shed any light. To me, it seems clear evidence that this invisible killer is still winning.
I think we've got maybe a tsunami coming down the pike here. And I guess air pollution has always been a trade-off, that the building the economy is more important than actually protecting the public. Well, I don't think that's acceptable, actually. As doctors, we have to stand up and say something when it's wrong. And I don't think this is right. So we do need to do some action and have action now.
That was a podcast of Costing the Earth from the BBC.